Thank you all for being here today, and I want to get right to a couple of things because I want to give our speaker that's here today that came down from Bernie an opportunity to get as much time as he needs to present to you today some things on the Medicaid waiver program. We're going to talk a little bit about our resource fair that's coming up on October the 14th. The resource fair is this: Saturday, October the 14th, starts at 9 in the morning, ends at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We will be using the ballroom, which is the big room next door. They call it Ballroom A. That's where all the providers are going to be set up. This room here will be divided in half. The front half will be for childcare. So if you're going, oh, I know somebody that would like to come to this, but they need childcare, we will have childcare. So this room will be used and that room next door. Resource fair is going on with all the providers in this room. Back in over here will be folks that are going to talk. There'll be a talk on guardianship, trusts, Social Security, Medicaid waiver programs, healthcare options, prescription drug savings, and at the end, a panel discussion. It is October the 14th. It's a Saturday. I want to introduce Mark Olson.
So, first of all, thank you for having me. I feel almost silly that the second thing I'm going to tell you is that was a wonderful introduction, but there's a whole lot I don't know. And I'm actually fortunate to have a couple of friends here in the room, Charles and Leslie, who I've met for the first time in 2018 as I was passing through town, and in that same trip met my wife and married her 3 months later. So there must be some magic in Bernie. So let's see. Let me just go. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, yeah, that's me. Unfortunately, I have to keep looking. It's not showing me what I see here. But I want to go back really quick. So here, let me first off, I'm the father of 2 significantly developmentally disabled daughters. That's my most, sorry, I can project even further. So, but if you can't hear me, please, that's great. It's because I don't know. So I have a 19-year-old and a 27-year-old. The 27-year-old I adopted from Vietnam when she was 2. And the 19-year-old is a product of my marriage 4.5 years ago, to the woman I met driving through Bernie. They presently live at home with us. My 27-year-old has chosen her home and community-based setting to be our family home until she chooses otherwise. And Layla, the 19-year-old, is still in the 18 to 21 program in Bernie. So that all sort of works out for us. We do 3 things at my firm. So I founded an organization, a nonprofit called LTO Ventures. And if you're going to ask me what LTO stands for, it's my daughter's initials, Lindsay Tuluan Olson. We all name our nonprofits after our kids. At least a lot of them do. 3 things we do. The main activity that Bill alluded to is we provide consulting and project management services to build intentional communities, employment, educational and social programs for other nonprofits around the country. We have 8 projects in 6 states that we work on right now. In fact, I'll spend most of the rest of this month traveling to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Mexico. I'll be in Vegas later. So we're scattered all over the country. The second thing, really important and most relevant to you, is we're building our own community in the Hill Country, what we call an intentional community. And I like using that term. Some self-advocates don't particularly care for that term, but I think it's very appropriate. And then the third thing we do is a lot of advocacy. So one of the things that's really going to underpin what I'm going to try to cover today. I've looked at your resource fair schedule, and every single one of those topics is a 2-hour meeting, and you have them for 25 minutes. So good luck. It's going to be, we're just going to give you a little touch, and then you're going to have to go do some more research. They're very complicated. I could spend all day talking to you about waivers, and your eyes would glaze over after the first 2 hours. Let's see what else I want to talk about. Oh, yeah. So that's what we do. Okay, so today. I want to touch on 4 of the 7 waivers in the state of Texas. I'm going to do it briefly, and really what I'm going to focus on are some changes in the last year that are very relevant, I think, to what you're thinking about, Bill, from a program standpoint, but also what I work on, and to some degree, Charles and Leslie, perhaps you guys with Southwind Fields, in terms of residential and what you're able to build and where you're able to use those waivers. Let's see. So we'll deal with residential, non-residential. I'll try and give you a little bit of information how you can learn more and how you can prepare and how you can understand it. Some of these things are still happening dynamically. In fact, a program that my daughter is in has called a meeting next week to tell us about the changes that they're going to have to implement in that program. It's the Helping Hands group, if you know them. Like I said, the two major changes, really important, you guys know your individual situations best. And one of the things I find is I can give you kind of a basic, and then all your questions are going to come from a very personal point of view. Every presentation I do, ever, always, questions come up. Somebody says, but I need to know about this right here. And I go, I get it, right? I live in that world because both of my daughters are on the HCS waiver, and we fight every day with the state of Texas over them. In fact, I just won a fight today, so a little bit relieved. A lot of the rule changes I'm going to talk about took effect on March 1 of this year, so they're very current, and some of them haven't been fully populated through the system, if you will. And like I said, I don't have all the answers, and in fact, I may even get some things wrong. I hope not. If you guys know and you're like, no, Mark, I don't think that's right, just put up your hand. I want to make sure we get everybody the best information. Okay. So I really wish I could see the screen, but that's okay. That's all right. You'll see the back of my head too much. We're going to talk about 4 waivers today. So like I said, there's 7. The 4 that matter most to me are HCS, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services, Texas Home Living, CLASS, which is Community Living Assistance Supports and Services, and DBMD, which is Deaf, Blind, and Multiple Disabilities. The other's a little bit more complicated. Now, one of the things I'm going to leave with Bill, but you're also going to have a link at the end of this presentation, and I'll send you guys the copy of the presentation, see the active links. The state of Texas has a table. This is 24 pages, which has not been updated in 5 years. Thank you, HHSC, which is Health and Human Services Commission, who administers the waiver programs in the state of Texas. But it is a table that explains what they cover, what they don't. It's a quick read. You can go learn more. It's hard to find good information, especially stuff that relates specifically to your situations. But this is what I was handed when I first moved to the state, and it's a thing I still use. And I bugged the state to update it, and it's not high on their list of priorities.
What is the name of that?
So this is, you'll see it, this is, it's an overview of the waiver programs. So you'll see it in the link. We call it a side-by-side. So you can kind of see how they all rack up side by side and who covers what, and it gets gruesomely detailed. Let's see. So show of hands, who knows what a Medicaid waiver is? Okay, great. Let me start a step back from there. Medicaid was formed in 1937 as a way to provide financial assistance to low-income individuals and individuals with disabilities and seniors. A waiver program was created in I want to say 64, 68, I always get that wrong, as a way to waive certain requirements, certain income requirements, certain other requirements, so that individual seniors, especially individuals with disabilities, could access that funding, right, separate from sort of Medicaid in general. So we tend to think of Medicaid as a medical assistance program. And the waivers in the way that I think about them are more for other things to support individuals with disabilities, right? So we call what those things cover a service array. You'll see it in the language, so I'm just going to introduce the term now. The waivers are a combination of state and federal funding. Every state has a different ratio of how much federal money and state money go together. The feds have tons of money. If there aren't enough waivers in a particular state, it's usually because the state is unwilling to fund their side of it. Texas is a perfect example. There are 350,000 people on the wait list for waivers here because the state won't fund it, because for them to do that would be something on the order of $8 billion new dollars a year, every year going forward, and then it would just grow from there. So property tax seems to get more of a priority. And then, really important, Where the service is delivered that the fund that waiver money pays for is a setting. So you're going to hear me use the term setting a lot. So let's go through some of this. Like I said, combination state and federal money. Acronyms, it's really easy for me to fall into acronyms. CMS stands for Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. That's the federal agency that administers the waivers. In Texas, the agency that administers it is HHSC, or Health and Human Services Commission. Let's see how we cover this. There are sort of two buckets of money that go to support individuals with disabilities living in the community. One is largely institutional money, and there are state-supported living centers in the state of Texas that get that institutional money. But it also goes to nursing homes, right? It goes to other more congregate settings. And then there's a whole other bucket where the whole world is moving, which is HCBS, and that's Home and Community-Based Services. So you're going to hear me use the term HCBS a lot. The waivers that we talk about that I mentioned before, HCS, Texas Home Living, CLAS, and DBMD, are HCBS waivers.
Did you say HDDS or?
Home and community based, so HCBS. Our whole world is full of acronyms, and what we do is just, in fact, in my business plans that I write for my clients, we do a whole section which is just a glossary, because it's the only way you can keep up with the terms. Really important to Medicaid HCBS waivers is a federal regulation that came down in January of 2014 called the Final Settings Rule. It dictates where you can use waiver funding for residential and non-residential settings, right? So you think of residential, could be a group home, where individuals are living together, and that money would help pay for the services and supports they would need to live in that home. It can be non-residential, like a rehabilitation program, right, or a work location program, right? So residential, non-residential. So when that waiver first came out, they gave all the states 5 years to come into compliance. So what the federal government says, we're going to set a floor. You can't be below that floor. You have to come into compliance with that. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of background. It's a little technical, but it kind of helps you to understand where it goes from here. So all the states had 5 years to come into compliance. Well, then COVID, then other things. And so that eventually was a 9-year period, which ended March 1st of this year. March 1st of this year was a really big deal, but so was the year right before that, because the state was so far behind. And they jammed everything through last spring. And we fought them on most of it, and we won on most of it. So I'm very happy about that. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. Like I said, yeah. Oh, and that last little bullet. Rehabilitation does not exist in the state of Texas anymore. It's been replaced by something called ISS, Individualized Skills and Socialization, and it's a horrible name. All right. Okay, so from a housing choice standpoint, right, if you have a son or daughter, how many people have a son or a daughter with a disability? How many of them are adults? Okay, all right, so this is very, very relevant to you, right? Where you can use waiver funding to help your son or daughter to live in the community as independently as possible is one of the most important purposes for the waiver funding. There's a ton of restrictions that came with that a little more than a year ago that said it could only be used in a few places. Typically, right, so when we evolved from more institutional thinking to more home and community-based thinking, everybody kind of defaulted to group homes, 3 or 4 unrelated adults under the same roof with a house manager, because that was an easy model, the government could understand it. And so they just pounded them out all over the country. And that's great. If that's an environment that your son or daughter thrives in, I'm a massive fan, right? But they're not for everybody. One size does not fit all. There are apartment communities, there's other sorts of models. Leslie and Charles are building a really cool model. I do what I think are really cool models around the country. We need all those options so that people can have real choices that suit, where they are, right? And as they grow, as our sons and daughters continue to grow, where they want to live may change. So that money should apply across a lot of different areas, right? What the state decided before last March was you couldn't do anything that was considered congregate. Group homes are fine, a couple of other settings are fine, but no intentional communities, right? So do you guys know Marbridge up near Austin? Do you know, so they don't use waiver funding, right? My friend Jerry and Judy Horton built Down Home Ranch. All right, it's considered an institution, except for some of the homes they have out in Elgin and scattered around. Daymark Living up in Waxahachie, they don't use the waivers up there. It's all private pay. Brookwood outside of Houston, Cornerstone Ranch in McKinney. But we're breaking through. So 29 acres in Denton, Crossroads, Texas, outside of Dallas, just got certified by the state as a setting where you can use the waiver funding. They have a neighborhood of beautiful homes. There's a project going up in Plano called My Possibilities. Actually in Garland, it's going in Garland. The main organization's in Plano. So all these things said, I love this language. Sorry, I have to get right up here. You couldn't use the funding if the dwellings created a residential setting distinguishable from other areas. I'm sorry, what does that mean? So we got them to eliminate it. We called it the 110 bad words. All right. Here's where people like you helped with us. So they tried to jam all these changes on us last year. We rallied groups together. Charles and Leslie, I don't even know if you guys were involved in this at all. We got settings all over the state. We generated 1,006 comments. The state had never seen that kind of response before, all asking the exact same thing: delete those words. They deleted those words from the HCS, Texas Home Living class, and DBMD. You can now use any of you can use funds from those waiver programs to pay for individuals to live in intentional communities around the state now. So that's just opening up a market in a big way. Texas had been one of the most restrictive. Now it's one of the least restrictive. The other thing that we got, and I think I have to go back and check, but we wanted them to, all right, so what the state understood was a residence where you could have host home or companion care, right? Now, do you guys know the difference in host home? Do you even know what host home and companion care is? It's okay if you don't. Host home means you're an individual with disability. You live in somebody else's home, and the state pays for that family to support you to live in that home. Companion care means your support person comes and lives in your home, and if you want to change, that person moves out. Right? It's also called shared living. Right? So those were options the state understood because those are the most cost effective. You can give out the least amount of money to support somebody living with another family. And then they understood 3-person and 4-person residence group homes. And we said we have to put it into the regulations that people have to be informed about more options. Right? Because if you sit down with your case manager from your LIDA or your agency and you want to talk about housing for your son or daughter, they will not tell you about anything other than group homes, staying in your family home, or host home. They won't tell you. You have to make them tell you. So we tried to put it in the regulations that they had to do that. The other thing that we got in there was something called heightened scrutiny. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit more technical than I'd usually like to get, but it's kind of important. Which basically says, if there's a setting that I want my son or daughter to live into, and this is really more a job for the setting than it is for you guys, but, and the state says, we're not so sure that's HCBS. It feels maybe like it might be a little bit institutional. This was a judicial process that we could go, an appeal process that we could go through as a provider to say, nope, it's HCBS, right? You should be able to use it here. That mechanism didn't exist in state regulations before. The state could just kind of make up its mind and not tell you why they did it, and deny and deny and deny. And so we got that in there as a way to appeal. 29 acres appealed using that exact process last year and won. So we know that it works. This is really important for you guys when you think about, so if you guys think about doing an intentional community at all, or you know people who want to do that, or even the ones that are coming online in the next 5 to 8 years, this is going to make it possible for them to happen. Now remember, I said, I'm a massive fan of pretty much any option, except ones that hurt people. So this hopefully will encourage more and more settings to be created in more and more places around the state, especially rural, because there just aren't enough choices right now. There's a massive deficiency. Yes, Bill?
I've got a question. When you were referring to, we got changes, we got rid of the 110 words, we went to judicial process. Who's the we?
Yeah. So like I said, we pulled a lot of organizations in the state together last year, and their base of supporters. 29 Acres, Down Home Ranch, Marbridge not so much because they don't care, but a bunch of, they just don't. I love Scott to death, but it's not his fight, right? Aaron Kiltz at Brookwood and Georgetown. So a lot of communities that are coming online. Daymark even stepped up, even though they're fighting the fight to try to. Daymark especially stepped up because they've got 202 beds to fill, and they really need to be able to use the waivers, and they can't right now. Hello. So we was a very large statewide coalition of providers, families, advocates, others, and just massive letter writing campaign. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, because I know Daymark did River Gardens, or operating River Gardens. Is Daymark still operating here in the Comal County area for group home living?
So we're talking about two different Daymarks.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know that Daymark. There's a Daymark Living, which is in Waxahachie, Texas, which is about 30 miles south of Dallas. It is an intentional community built on 40 acres, which is really cool because the 40 acres next to it is one of the largest tulip growing operations in the United States. So watch their website if you're into tulips, because they do this. They have 1 million tulip bulbs. No, they're two very different things. Let's see. All right. So what is this? Well, what it means is you've got more options. So let's keep going here. As I said before, dehabilitation got eliminated. Right? The legislature passed legislation several years ago that eliminated it. They turned around, and so effective March 1st this year, there is no more dayhab. It has been replaced with ISS. It is meant to create more individualized programming for individuals with IDD, and it is meant to have them out in the community more than in a facility-based setting. That's the premise. I sort of don't have a problem with that. My daughter's out all day out in the community with a highly individualized program, but that's because there's no set program really for her to go to, so I just have somebody that I hire who takes her out every day. What are the problems with this?
The rate?
Well, yeah, let's see, we could start with the rate. But let me start with even something more specific. So the first is your funding comes related to the level of need of the people that you serve. And there are ratios for staff to those people with level of need that force the provider, literally force the provider to group people by level of need instead of having a more, what I consider, integrated group of individuals with higher and lesser needs who can learn from each other and bond and do all the things that they do. And then your staffing is related to that. But to his point, the rate is based, they expect you as a provider to survive basically if you're full. Like if you, so it really favors LON 1 and LON 5. If you guys know level of need for your sons and daughters, LON, so My daughters are 6 and 9. So they're actively discriminated against in this because it's almost impossible as a provider to be able to run your business on the rates that they've provided, especially if you don't have the full complement of individuals you're serving on a particular day and can charge for it, right? So if you're a 1-to-3 ratio, but only 2 people show up on a particular day, you lose money as a provider. You barely make money with 1-to-3, but you lose money when you're below that. So the staffing ratios for on-site activities versus off-site activities are different. So try to figure out your hiring and your staffing based on that. It's just insane. And then at this point, the rates are crazy. It gets even more complicated. Now, if you want to provide ISS, you have to go get a new license from the state, which is time-consuming, expensive, so on and so forth. Every individual who served in those programs must have an individual plan developed for them by the provider and written into their IPC before the provider can bill and get paid for that. So you just added 2 big burdens on top of providers who are barely getting by or not getting by to begin with. What we're seeing around the state, and we have a couple of groups that follow this, that we work with. We're watching providers going out of business, and now individuals with disabilities don't have programs, so they have to scramble to find it someplace else. We're finding that they're not taking the funding anymore, and they're going to private pay. Because if you're private pay, you don't have to go through all this nonsense. And the third thing that they're doing is they're using all kinds of different codes and workarounds. So we're not doing ISS. We're doing supported employment. We're doing pre-vocational training. We're doing something else, even though it looks exactly like a day habilitation program. That's not a good long-term strategy, because at some point something's going to come back and bite you in the behind. It's just going to happen. These are just some of the challenges that we're dealing with. Reimbursement rates, right, IPC. And let's just say you got all those details worked out, and you've got some on-site, some off-site activities. But today, Tommy, who's in one of those groups, decides he doesn't want to go off-site. Okay, so now your on-site staffing is impacted. Your ability to charge for the off-site is impacted, right? So as a provider, it's so complicated now when it just didn't have to be. So anyway, how can you prepare? From a housing choice standpoint, when you're meeting with your case managers, and if let me do a really quick show of hands. How many people have waivers for their sons and daughters? Okay. Fight for housing choice in their person-centered plans, right? Make your case managers tell you about options. Make them, right? And if they don't tell you, come and call me, and I will tell you the choices. Then you can go back to them and go, but why didn't you tell me about this and this and this? You guys will all get copies of every slide here. I'll email to Bill. He can send it out to everybody. I have a hard copy here if he just wants to photocopy it. Sorry, I probably should have led with that. Sorry. Probably should have led with that. Sorry. A great resource. You'll see it on the next slide. There's a group out of Spring, Texas called Consolidated Planning Group. Wonderful organization, financial planners. I use them as a financial planner, but they do a gazillion webinars on everything you guys care about and everything I care about, right? From guardianship to financial planning to housing choices to employment choices to transition to everything else. And they keep a massive library of all these past webinars. So I've done 4 or 5 of them to date. They're a really great resource. They're really good people too. But it's a really great resource. So you can go down through, and I'll give you the link. You can go down and look and just, I'd say, use their video resource, their webinar resource for your homework, because they do a really good job. And sign up to get their notifications of their future webinars, because they do 1 a week, sometimes more than 1 a week. You can also go to my page, and I try to keep as much information on there as possible. I have an advocacy page. I should stay on top of it a little bit more than I do, but I'm busy building communities around the country, so sometimes I don't keep up. From an ISS standpoint, how many people have sons or daughters in some kind of day program? Okay. Has your provider come and talk to you about the changes with ISS?
I told her.
Yeah. Well, no, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that. So we have a great group that we work with. They're in Bernie and San Antonio called Helping Hands. And I know them very well. And when this whole thing was coming about, I said, so what's your plan? Right? I was trying to understand what the impact was going to be, because my daughter really only goes 1 day a week. But I said, I want to understand what the impact is. And they went, what are you talking about? And I went, that's the problem, right? State did a terrible job of communicating to providers that this change was coming, and they gave you almost no time to prepare. So I think I told them in December, they had to have everything in place by March. I'm going to learn next week how it's going to impact them, and there are going to be some changes. I know there are going to be changes. Fortunately, we're private pay, but it's going to impact the program. So talk to your program providers and ask them, what's going on with ISS?
So how detailed does the justification to ISS and the PDP has to be? Is it like an addendum, or what is needed, or what does the state need to hear?
That's an excellent question.
From the service coordinator?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's probably in the same way that they do person-centered plans now, which is like 1 page. Like you've captured your whole child's future planning on 1 page. Not so much. It's not exactly PATH, if anybody knows what PATH is. The state was a little ambiguous about, it's like, they want to know, what do they want to do? What skills do they want? Remember, it's individualized skills and socialization. So what skills do you want to develop with the individuals? How are they going to be socialized? How are they going to be integrated in the community? How are they going to be made to live as independently as possible? And what are you as a provider going to do with that? You could probably get by with a page. But
So as long as you indicate, like, Billy likes to go out in the community for 2 days out of the week, so that's offsite.
he wants to gain skills in how to shop for meals and prepare food. So 2 days a week, we're going to go to H-E-B, and we're going to build a menu, and we're going to, those sorts of things. Let's see. Also talk to your LIDA. I appreciated that I was thinking that was going to be one of the acronyms I was going to have to explain, but I appreciate you doing that. I work very closely with my LIDA on everything that we do. We just fought a battle with the state and won with them. Talk to them about programming and options and what those requirements are, because they play a role in that. If you really, really, really want to punish yourself, sign up at GovDelivery to get emails from HHSC so you get notifications about these changes coming up. I get a ton of them, and I can't figure out half of them, and I live in this world. Sorry.
So I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
On the ISS, back in the day hab days, they had to choose. The individual had to choose whether they wanted day hab or EA, employment assistance or supported employment. Does that still exist as a either or?
I don't see why it would. The changes affected DAHAB, so there isn't a DAHAB choice anymore. There's an ISS choice that replaced it. ISS is not a supported employment program. That doesn't mean you couldn't do things related to employment, but here's the interesting thing. You can't work a job under ISS and get paid for it.
Okay, so it is
Yeah.
very similar, because you can't bill for the ISS
Right.
at the same time you're billing for employment assistance or stuff. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So it is an issue.
yeah.
So we have a lot of volunteers out there.
Yeah, you couldn't create, let's say one of the things we're going to do on ISS is we're going to create a cupcake business. You're going to have to give them away. You can't sell them. Anyway. You guys have resources. You already talked about some of the resources you have. If ARC chapter, whatever ARC chapter you have, get to know them really well. We work really closely with the ARC of San Antonio. They do a great job. There are other ARCs that do great jobs. ARC of Dallas-Fort Worth does a great job. Consolidated Planning Group is a great source of information because what they'll do, as I said before, they'll pull together the webinars with experts, and then you can go listen to them and ask them questions. They do a really great job. You can always check with us to the extent that I know, or sometimes I don't know, but I know how to direct you to a resource. We're happy to help. And then, like I said, you'll get this when you get the presentation from Bill. I did get a question before. There's the waiver comparison table. That's that 24-page thing that's really detailed. This is the link to the video library for CPG. If you guys aren't familiar with how level of need terminology is defined in the state, I included that up here as well. I included how you subscribe for the Gov Delivery email notifications. You can read about ISS, but even I can't make heads or tails of it. Those are all my slides. I'll leave that up in case anybody wants to see it. So, you guys have been great about asking questions. I will take more.
How would we get in touch with you?
I left a stack of business cards over here. Just grab one and email me. Or you can talk to Bill, and Bill knows how to reach me.